In a world overflowing with distractions, we seek meaning. How do we transform ambition into something deeper, into true fulfillment? I'm Sam Pepin, CEO of Centrica, and I've spent years helping businesses succeed by connecting their goals to something bigger. On the Meaningful Podcast, we explore not just how to win in business, but how to grow as individuals. Through conversation with thought leaders, innovators, and everyday heroes, we uncover the stories that drive us towards something greater. Whether you're striving for success, seeking purpose, or just looking for the next steps in your journey, this podcast is your guide to navigating the intersection of ambition, growth, and meaning. So please join me and our incredible guests as we redefine what's possible in both business and life. Enjoy. And we are back. Lovely people, it's phenomenal to, I suppose, re-kick off this lovely podcast. We've been perhaps on the go, doing an expansion in El Salvador, doing some restructuring perhaps inside of Centrica to make it more AI native. It is such an incredible pleasure to be with you again. And I want to pass along this little message because we're going to be keeping now our normal remit when it comes down to the podcast. So expect multiple podcasts perhaps to emerge in July and beyond. We hope that you've been so well, and thank you so much for supporting this show again. Faith and innovation share the same DNA. Both require belief in what does not exist yet. Welcome to the Meaningful Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Pepin, and today we're exploring three powerful themes: the long game of trust, faith as a leadership force, and building a legacy beyond revenue. Our guest today is Carl Grant III, founder of the Rainmaker Group, a business development strategist, speaker, author, investor, and former global head of business at Kool-Aid, where he helped grow revenue from roughly 310 million to over 2 billion. But Carl's story is not just about revenue growth. It is about how real business development works when it is built on relationship rather than transactions, service rather than pressure, and patience rather than the quick close. In this conversation, Carl takes us through his military foundation, his philosophy of servant leadership, the role faith plays in his executive life, and why the best entrepreneurs are not just sellers, but evangelists of ideas that do not fully exist yet. We are also explore what it means to build a life where business, faith, family, risk, and legacy are not separate compartments, but part of the same calling. If you enjoy this discussion, please let the world know with a like, a small review, or even a quick share. Your supports help more people find meaningful content just like this. Let's begin. Mr. Carl Grant III, welcome on the Meaningful Podcast. How are you doing?
Thanks, Sam. Real good.
I'm very excited for this show. We've been introduced to each other for not a long time at all, but I always found you so wise and so insightful. So I'm very, very looking forward to this episode. But to kick us off, please tell us more about the Rainmaker Group, please.
So I formed the Rainmakers Group when I left full-time employment. I had, 27 years of full-time employment. Last 20, I was global head of business development for a top law firm, where we grew revenue from 310 million to over 2 billion in revenue, and pretty successful run. And so when I left on my 20th anniversary, I decided I would set up a consulting group where I would go into not just law firms. I do law firms, but I do it for a variety of companies that want to grow their revenue the way we did at my last job. And so I go in and I help with strategy, with training, with coaching and execution. And, a lot of times they want me, but sometimes I have other, people that work with me that I will send in and I will guide their efforts, and they get great results.
Very nice. Take us back to the beginning of all this. You're obviously a strategist. You're somebody that understands which levers to pull to be able to grow companies. Where does this skills came from in your opinion? Perhaps do you think it's do you think you were born with it? How do you refine it? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, it's a calling. I wrote a book a few years back where, one of the first things I talk about is finding your calling. And in my case, my calling found me. And I never set out to do, business development for professional services organizations. It wasn't even something I'd even thought of. And I I had another job in economic development where I doubled the number of venture capital firms in the geography where I was doing this job. It was Fairfax County, Virginia, and then Price Waterhouse and Coopers and Lybrand were merging. The two of the biggest accounting firms were merging to create the largest professional services organization in the world. When they did it, they had 165,000 employees in I think it was 155 countries, and I got a phone call where they said, "We want you to come and do business development for us." We kind of call sales and professional services business development because sales is too crash. What's the word I'm looking for? Cat. What's the word? It's too crass. That's the word I'm looking for. And so I said, I don't know about that. And then they told me what they were going to pay me, and I said, oh, yeah, I'll do that. And so I did it, and I was really good at it, Sam. I didn't realize that it was a gift that I had until I stepped into it, and I just did what came naturally. I listened to the accountants that I was working with about what they did, and rather than focusing on the accounting services they delivered, I focused on who they did it for. And they did it for some of the biggest companies in the world, and they did it for some of the biggest and most active venture capital funds in the world. And so I thought about who I was targeting. I was targeting these emerging companies that wanted to grow and become very successful companies like those big companies we represented. And so I realized that these emerging companies all needed funding, and they needed customers, and they needed partners. And so I started making it my business rather than trying to sell accounting services. I started making connections to funding sources, customers, partners, acquirers, and I became what they call a super connector. And you know what? It was really effective at selling accounting services. We sold in 2 years, we sold 85 new audit engagements, and that's an astronomical number of new audit engagements. And so I remember they had to keep changing my goal because I was bypassing my goals, and so they were going to have to pay me too much money. So they kept increasing the goals that I hit, and I kept bypassing my numbers, and I realized I can make a lot of money doing this, and so it was fun. It was rewarding, and the part I really enjoyed about it, Sam, wasn't so much making the money or winning the new business, but it was helping the people that I was working with because I was helping them get more successful in their businesses. And so I really enjoyed it. And I really set out to be an entrepreneur when I started out in this whole world. And so I did a couple of more entrepreneurial ventures after PricewaterhouseCoopers, and then I got a call from my friends over at Cooley, the law firm that I worked for, and they once again recruited me to come over there. And the business. So I did two startups in the early 2000s, and that was a rough time to be in the startup business because uh, you know either you lived through it or you read about the tech crash in like 2000 2001, right? And I lived through it. It was rough. And you know I didn't the company I was with was going away, and I had this job open up to me, and I didn't know that I would spend 20 years at this job. And I did. And we grew revenue, like I said, from 310 million to over 2 billion. That's 1.7 billion dollars in annual revenue we added to that firm over 20 years. It's a lot of revenue, a lot of growth. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. And so when I left, I thought, it'd be really fun to help others figure out how to do this. And so what I really enjoy doing is coming and mentoring those who want to do this. Sometimes it's partners in these professional services firms. Sometimes it's people like me who are just getting started out. And so that's how it all started.
And before then, you come from a military background, correct?
Yeah. So my dad was in the military, and he never pressured me to do it, but I once again, I got outreached to by ROTC when I was in college, and they said, you would be a strong candidate for our ROTC scholarship, and I remember talking to my dad about it. He said, well, why don't you apply for it? You don't have to take it. See
Right.
if you get it. And if you get it, then you can make a decision. And so I wasn't sure it was something I wanted to do. I was a young person. I was only 18 years old in college. And so I was awarded a 3-year scholarship. And I knew part of the deal with my dad was that if I paid for my own college, he would buy me a car. And so that seemed like a pretty good deal. And so I did. I joined the military. I became an infantry officer, became a public
Yep.
affairs officer. I served as a general's aide, which was a great deal of fun. I really enjoyed my time in the military. Never had to go to war. I did go into Panama and Honduras right after we had invaded Panama back in the day,
Yep.
and so yeah, I mean we had bullets with us, and people could shoot at us, but we didn't get shot at. So fortunately, I didn't see the bad side of the military, but I benefited from all the training, and I was ready to go and fight if I had to.
Right. I mean, that's right. Really, I think that the way this shape your approach to leadership, resilience, and faith, obviously under pressure, is one thing that really interests me. I saw a quote of yours, which is the army taught me discipline, faith taught me direction. I really like that. How do you think perhaps that your military foundation shaped the way you approach leadership and business strategy today?
Well, so it's interesting. You mentioned faith, and I remember, I came to faith later in life. I was 24 years old, and I'd already been through the military training, and I was reading the Bible for the first time in my life, and I'm reading these radical teaching of Jesus. I mean, if you've never read the Bible before and you've just lived to gratify yourself your whole life, and all of a sudden you hear Jesus saying, "He who wishes to be first must be last and servant of all." You're like, whoa, last and servant of all. What does that look like? And so I thought about my military training, and I thought about what officers. I was an officer, and when you go to eat as an officer in charge of troops, you don't eat before your troops. You eat last, because you make sure that your soldiers are fed, and if there's not enough food, you don't get to eat, right? Because you're last and you're servants of all. And so I had that picture in my mind. If I want these people to follow me, I have to look out for their needs before my own, which means they get fed. And if there's not enough food, I don't get fed, and that might not seem like fun, but that's part of leadership. And so that was a big lesson in the military. And it wasn't just that one instance, but that was kind of the cornerstone of servant leadership that is taught in the Bible and is taught in the military.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned obviously two major success story of yours, one at PwC, one at Kool-Aid. Both time you were sort of headhunted. So, like you said, your purpose, perhaps your purpose you didn't find it, it finds you. I think that's also very interesting. I hear that constantly, by the way, with very successful people. Really, to me, I'm interested in what core business development principles allow you to consistently scale multi-billion dollar, organizations. We're talking about very huge scales here. What do you think that you do that the other people are not able to understand or accomplish? And what type of strategic, perhaps, development principles allow you to be able to accomplish that?
So I think your typical person that comes into this type of role thinks transactional. They think sales, right? I meet you, I want something from you, I'm going to sell you, and I'm going to get you to buy from me. And it's a very short-term view of how to do things. I take a relationship approach, and I take a long-term approach. And so when I meet somebody, I don't think about, can they buy from me today? I think about, what can I do for them today? And then what I do is I develop a relationship with that person. And maybe we don't do business today, but I'm setting up a situation where there can be a lifetime of business. It may not be now. It may not even be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years from now. Maybe it's 10 years from now. I got people that I've met 10, 15, 20 years ago that I reach out to, and I did favors for them when I met them. Maybe they were looking for a job. Maybe they were looking for funding, whatever. And they have favorable a favorable view of what I did for them. And so it's easier to then try to turn that into a business relationship, because if you try to sell somebody the moment you meet them, either they're going to say yes or no. And if they say no, not only did you not get a sale, but you didn't get a relationship. And so if you develop a relationship with them and you don't push them to do a sale, they'll let you know if they want to buy whatever it is you're representing. Um, you just can't be too quick with the close. I do this time and time again. I'm working with, a handful of clients today, and I'm dealing with some of the best, practitioners in the world in their respective fields. And interestingly, those people that are really good at what they do, they ask me after we have a meeting, do you have any pointers for me? And these are people who are really good at what they do. And the fact that they're teachable enough to learn from that. And so I give them ideas. So we just did a call today with a huge international company with another law firm that I'm representing that does a very niche type of work. And the partner asked me, what could I be doing different to be a little better? And I said, well, offer them something they can't say no to, right? Because if you say, I want to offer you this service and it's going to cost X number of thousands of dollars, right? It's easy to say no to that. But if you say, let me give you some pointers on some things that you could be doing to improve what you're doing, and you give them some pointers, they're not going to turn that away because you're not charging them for it. But you do it in such a way that they realize that you have the expertise that they need. And they're like, wow, that was really insightful. We'd like your help with that. And so I think that's part of the art of closing these deals, is not giving the other person the opportunity to say no, because you haven't asked them for anything. You're just offering to give them something that can help them. And then if you do it in such a way that they realize that you really know what you're doing and you really know what you're talking about, then they come back and they say, would you help us with this?
Yes. No, value first, transaction second. I always been this way myself. Though I want to ask you a question. There's a balance between playing the long game, perhaps, without overseeing any of the short games to a point where it can be counterproductive. And I'm sure you would agree with that. I'm really wondering, perhaps for you, when you are in a high performance quota basically driven environments, which you mentioned in sort of the organization that you were in, how do you balance this relationship mindsets to make sure that you don't burn any bridges, but also making sure that you understand that at some point perhaps there's a need for business to continue and therefore money to come in? Tell me more about how you master that skill.
Yeah. So in the professional services world, the quotas are, I'm going to say most of them are soft quotas. They're not as much hard quotas. I think the firms that set the hard quotas and they don't play the long game, they're thinking very short-sightedly, and they're not very successful in what they do. And so if you're going to hire a quality person to do this type of role, you want to hire somebody, one, that knows what the heck they're doing and has a proven ability to do it, right? Like the revenues didn't grow the way they grew where I worked by accident. I mean, we made that happen, right? And so I understand. I've had friends that I've counseled who are in like straight quota jobs selling software, and I get it. Like, you got to close sales. If you don't meet your quotas, you're going to be out of a job. But at the same time that you're trying to meet these quotas, I've talked to friends of mine that were in these types of businesses, but then they made a connection with a CFO of a huge company, and I say, well, take pause on this one, right? This CFO of this big company, if you try to sell him on your software and he says no, you've burned that bridge forever, right? And so maybe for these smaller companies, you try to close them because I know you got to hit your numbers. So I get that. I'm not blind to that. But for this guy with this big company who's going to be at other big companies for the rest of his life, maybe you don't try to close him right away. Maybe you say, what is it that I could help you with? Are you looking to sit on any boards? Maybe I can introduce you to a board seat. Maybe you want to be on a podcast. I just met this guy, Sam, who hosts this great podcast. I think you'd be really interesting. Let me introduce you to him, right? Little favors like that. Are you hiring? Maybe I can help you find the person you're trying to hire. How long do you see yourself in this role? Most CFOs stay in a job a couple years. I mean, sometimes they stay longer, but the average shelf life of the CFO is like 2 years. They're always moving, and general counsels move a lot too. Those are primarily who was buying what I was selling, and so if you look out for them and you say, look, I'm a confidential source that when you're loose in the saddle, you're thinking about your next opportunity, just know that you can confidentially come to me. If you send me your resume, I will treat it with the utmost confidence. I will never let your employer know that you're looking, but I will keep an eye out for you. And so I've done that for general counsels that have great jobs, and they have the tremendous ability to hire the firm that I'm representing, but they know I'm also looking out for them because maybe they want to do another IPO, right? General counsels love to do IPO. So do CFOs, by the way. And so if I'm looking out for them, they know that I'm potentially their ticket to the next job. And so they want to help me because they want me to help them. And so that's just one of those little nuances that most people don't think of. They don't. And then the other thing is a lot of younger people coming into this type of business, they think, well, what do I have to offer? I don't have anything to offer. I'm just a young person coming out of college. I'm like, well, you've been interviewing for jobs, right? Have you talked to other potential employers? Oh yeah, yeah, and there's some of these jobs you didn't take, right? And they're like, yeah, right. I said, well, you have like classmates that that might be a good fit for those jobs. Help your classmates out. I mean, when you can help somebody like that, it's best to do it. And then you just never know. I mean, I talk to people coming right out of law school that are thinking about joining a firm, and I take the time to talk with them. I talked to one last night, and I'm giving the guy a lot of good advice and helping him with his career. That guy is going to one day be somewhere that where he can do business with me, right? But not today. I don't know when he's going to be there or what he's going to be doing, but I'm helping him today, without any expectation of anything in return, knowing that one day I'll have a friend out there at a nice company, a nice firm, whatever.
Right. And I love that. And I think that's very much a core principle of the Rainmakers Group also, right? It's turning networking to impact, turning perhaps this, you're basically building an ecosystem that converts authentic connections into measurable opportunities, which is huge. And I saw a quote of yours, which was networking isn't about collecting contacts, it's about creating value. I think that's the case for any one of your relationship. I love this book by Oyen Taraban, which is a psychologist from California. It's a very interesting book. If you didn't read it, by the way, Carl, I recommend it. It's a great book that talks about the concept that for any relationship to stay perhaps afloat, our perceived value of what we bring each other needs to be at least equal. So that way, perhaps we think it's a fair relationship. In any abusive relationships, you can win that for a little while, but basically at some point it breaks, and that's where basically you burn that bridge, which you never want to do with anyone, actually. So I always come back to what I think it was Keith Firazi, and he talks about the currency of real networking is not greed, but it's generosity, right? And really, that's such a key element to what you're building. So I'm wondering, perhaps within that, how do you train entrepreneurs to shift from transactional, I need to hit my quotas, to perhaps purpose-driven relationship building, networking, Carl?
Yeah, I mean, so I deal with this day in and day out, as you can imagine. I get it because of the type of work I've done. I get calls from a lot of entrepreneurs, and and I think about how I react to the entrepreneurs that come to me. So when entrepreneurs come to me with their hands out, and they're just looking for what I can give them, and there's no sense of reciprocity, right? They're just trying to use you. Um, I have a real good nose for that, because when you hold yourself out as being a helpful person, people will try to take advantage of you, right? And so I there are people that I've helped in the past that come and they just want to try to squeeze you dry, and it's not effective. It's not. I mean, I had one of those today, and the guy wasn't anywhere close to being ready to do business with me at all, and he pre-revenue company, and I'm and he was insisting that I come in and I do all this help for him. And I've helped this guy in the past, but I just sense that he's just trying to squeeze me for more and more and more. And so you have to be careful when you're dealing with folks like that, because, you know, otherwise you'll be taken advantage of. So I basically told this entrepreneur that I'm not, I'm only doing paid assignments right now. Right. And that will make the user go away. Right. Whereas if somebody approaches me and they're taking more of the approach that I take when I'm talking to somebody, and they're being genuine and about building a relationship, then all of a sudden it changes my approach. Even if I have another company that's as pre-revenue as that company. I don't particularly care for pre-revenue companies at this stage in my life, but this other guy, I'm helping him because he was sincere in the way he approached me. And so I actually want to develop a relationship with this guy. And so I think about how I react when people come to me with things, and I think about how people are going to react to me when I go to them with things. And I don't want to be that guy that pushes the other person away, like that entrepreneur pushed me away today.
Yeah, exactly. And it's such an important skill to learn, because you're right. I think a lot of times we see these opportunities and we take them, and we just perhaps don't take into consideration that sometimes, yes, there is people that will try to use you and squeeze you if you let them do such thing. That is a very real thing, and something to think about at pretty much all time in business. All right. They are sharks, and they will continue to be sharks, and you need to be careful with those. I want to talk to you about faith in the boardroom, and really sort of the power of spiritual leaderships. You invited me very gracefully to your faith-based basically group on Sunday. I was able to join for a little while. Beautiful place, really loved it. And really, faith is something that a lot of people have a hard time to authentically perhaps put into the environments, and I suppose really being able to express themselves through faith, authentically speaking. So when you're integrating faith, humility, obviously moral clarity also into executive life, which can be more of a sort of a performance first, above everything, perhaps hit your quota and nothing else matter. I'm really interested in perhaps how you're seeing spiritual intelligence being a critical leadership traits, and how do you coach leaders to express faith in environments that valued performance above purpose?
It's an interesting question, Sam. I'm going to tell you something that I haven't told anybody else that I can remember, right? And so I don't necessarily coach folks to do it this way, because not everybody is open to this, right? You have to be a person of faith to be open to what I'm saying. But I'm going to tell you the truth about how I do business development, all right? And so as I'm approaching a new client, a new challenge where I need to bring in business, I pray over it. And I'm going to tell you how the pipeline gets filled. I don't fill it. Yeah, I will do the things that I'm trained to do, that I know to do, but I'm not relying on me to do it. I'm relying on God to do it. And I tell you what, when I do that, when I'm doing that faithfully, my my inbox is so full that I can't get to it. I've jokingly said, if I could just answer my emails or my LinkedIn messages, there's gold sitting in my inbox. My challenge is there's not enough hours in the day to get to all the messages that I get. That's the truth. And when I'm getting on a call with a client, and my family members have seen this happen, where I'm getting on a call, I haven't a clue what I'm going to tell my client. I probably shouldn't be saying this, because they're going to now know that I haven't a clue what I'm going to tell them. I pray about it before I get on the call. And I'm honestly amazed when I get on the call with what comes out of my mouth, because it's the wisdom from above that flows out. I don't even know where it came from, because I can tell you 5 minutes ago, it wasn't there. That's the truth of how I do it.
Wow, that's very honest, and I was not expecting anything else from you, Carl. Yeah, your connection with the divine is such a key aspect of who you are, and I really do admire that. I'll say it out loud. I think it's very very beautiful. How, I suppose, open minded you are, but how again how faithful you are and how much that drives your life. I think there's something priceless there that unfortunately many of Westerners are losing and have lost. There's always it's never there's no best time to join the kingdom. By the way, those are not for us to decide. You'll always be welcome. But I invite everybody to see that as a to see faith as something that's always with you, not just the version of you at home or not just the version of you with your family. It is who you are. It is part of your identity. And I think that's something so important. You talk about the abundant life, right? This concept in which perhaps with purpose and prosperity and believing in this connection divines, things get to you perhaps even without what, like you just said, without you even filling the pipelines. You also have a best-selling book. You're an author, and we'll talk about that. How to Live the Abundant Life, Finding Fulfillment by Aligning Purpose, Service, and Success. Not every single, most very successful people that I talk with also, have a concept that really, I suppose, prosperity and purpose is serving others. But I would love if perhaps you can tell us what are the daily habits or mindset shifts outside of praying. I suppose we just learned that one that defines an abundant life in practical terms. Perhaps what does that look like for you if you take a look at what an abundant life is?
Well, it starts up here. It starts in the mind, and most people don't realize that only you control what goes through here. Most people don't realize that. They think that they're just victims of whatever comes into their brain, and they have to think about that, right? And if you think about whatever pops into your brain, I mean, you can think about some pretty horrible stuff, right? You could think negative thoughts about yourself. You could think negative thoughts about your family, about your lot in life, and one of the things I address in the book, and I address in my life. I mean, wouldn't have written it in the book if it weren't in my life. It is you program what goes through your brain. And so, there's some practical things you can do. And I'll tell you what I do. It's not going to work for everybody. Mine comes from a faith background. If you don't have faith, you're going to have to use other tools. But what I choose to do is to replace the lies that come into your mind or come from the world. The world will tell you that you're old, you're fat, you're ugly, you're whatever. Like, people think these things on them. They look in the mirror and they think, oh, I look horrible. I'm getting old or whatever, like whatever it is. Like, people have insecurities about their weight, about their hair, about whatever, and get that garbage out of your mind. You always have to be thinking and saying positive things about yourself. Right. And so it may be hard for me to say it about myself. And so what I did, this was 5 years ago. This is a rather new revelation. I was driving to Texas. I moved to Texas from Virginia. So I had to make a couple of long drives from the East Coast to Texas. It's a 2-day drive. So 4 days in the car, up and back. And that's a lot of time to be sitting in the car. And so what are you going to do in the car for 2 days, 4 days, 8 days if you make 2 trips, which I did. I had books on tape. Yeah, not tape, on my phone, whatever, on Audible, right? And so I listened to books, but there's only so many books you can listen to. I listened to podcasts, only so many podcasts you can listen to, right? And then when I ran out of books and podcasts to listen to, and I listened to a little music. I started listening to preachers, like preachers I hadn't heard. I'm like, all right, let's hear what this guy's saying, and I started listening to these messages, and I'm like, wow, there's like really powerful messages out there, right? Like there's really powerful words in the Bible. And I got this revelation on my last trip to Texas that there's promises and there's truths in God's word. And so what I asked my wife if she was willing to do, I said, I want to claim these promises out loud. I want to, when you speak things out of your mouth, you give those words life, right? You think about, I believe the God of the universe created everything that's here. That's what I believe. I think you believe that too, right? And so if God could speak the world into existence, And I actually had an Israeli friend of mine who knew that I was a Christian believer, and he challenged me to study the Bible in Hebrew with him. And I'm like, are you sure I really need to do this? He goes, no, you have to do this. And if you have any Israeli friends, Israelis, they don't like to say, they don't like to take no for an answer. They're pretty adamant about like getting you to do what they want to do. And he convinced me that I had to do this. And so we studied the creation accounts in Hebrew. And he explained to me, and this guy was a PhD in physics, and he wasn't even like a hardcore believer, but he was fascinated with the spoken word and the power of these words and how they interacted with the physics, science, and he was even into the Kabbalah and all this stuff, and so he was a really interesting guy to study with. And so I studied about how the world was spoken into existence, and then and they got us talking about the power of the spoken word. And so if indeed the Bible is the word of God, which I believe it is, some people don't, but I believe it is. I believe you believe it is. If we believe
Yes, I
it's from
do.
God, then if you speak God's word out loud and you claim those words, it gives life to those words. You hold God to the promises he put in his word for your life. And so my wife and I have picked out verses of promises and things that he says about us. And we have a list of these and we claim them out loud every morning. And when you do that, and we have several lists, I mean, it may sound corny to a lot of your listeners, but I'm telling you, it's not corny because my life has changed, it's shifted since I started doing this. There's been a major shift. And so when you do that, Sam, you start to memorize those verses, right? Whatever we do prospers, right? When you say these things out loud, and then when you're in a situation where you don't feel like you're prospering, you say, God, you have said in your word that whatever I do will prosper. All of a sudden it changes the whole dynamic because you're quoting God's word back to him and you're telling him, you made this promise to me. And now I'm claiming it and I'm holding you to account to hold up to your word. And you know what? It's real. It's as real as anything can be real, right?
Yes.
It,
Yeah,
it,
100%.
yeah, I
And
mean,
the
it's like,
the
go ahead.
the storytelling, right? Seneca said storytelling is the oldest drug in existence. But he also says that whoever control your words control your world. And I 100% believe that. When you take a look at some of the best book of all time, 1984 by George Orwell and so on, they talk about this concept of if we remove the word of whatever, perhaps, for example, if we remove the word revolution, well, the people in which perhaps are feeling the way they're feeling can no longer describe what they're trying to basically accomplish because such thing doesn't exist. And that's why spoken word it's so powerful, is because there is a creator, you are a divine creation of such creator, and therefore as he was speaking the word into existence, you are, my friend, a portion of that gift, a portion of that divine connections, and speaking it. And I love this concept of keeping God accountable. I never heard it quite this way, but I think it's interesting because as we're
Sam,
making promise to each other. Please.
I was going to say, I want to take it out of the spiritual just for a second because not everybody's going to relate to this, right? So I had a friend. It was a woman that I knew in high school. She was a neighbor of mine, and she was 2 years older than me. She was homecoming queen. Beautiful, beautiful girl. I went out with her a couple times, and nothing serious, just a couple casual dates. We were working as lifeguards at the same swimming pool, and when I was in college, and I remember she said to me because her parents were divorced. She said this before she was married. She goes, "It is inevitable that I will be divorced one day." She said that, and I thought to myself, and I wasn't even a believer. I was the furthest thing from a believer. I said, "Why would you say that?" I mean, I had this wisdom before I even like knew all the stuff that I know today. I'm like, why would you say that? I remember her saying that, and you know, fast forward to today, 40 years later, she's divorced. She's divorced, and I saw her after all these years. We caught up over coffee, and and she said to me, "I'm old, or I'm getting old, or whatever," And I said, "Why are you saying that? Like, what you?" And I reminded her, I said, you said when you were just a young person, early 20s, you said it's inevitable that I will be divorced one day, and you're divorced, right? Did that have something to do with it? I don't know. I think it did, right? And she says, I'm getting old. I'm like, I'm not. I'm only 2 years younger than you. I'm just getting started. Like, I have my whole life in front of me. Why are you talking about being over the hill? You don't need to be. Like, what's up with that? Right. And so I see people do this to themselves all the time. Right. I'm getting fat. I don't even like saying these things. I'm using these as ways of examples. I'm getting fat. I'm getting old. I'm losing my hair. I don't do that. Like, I do the opposite I have a full head of hair. See that? You know, and I speak it sounds crazy, but I actually, I have bald friends that come up to me and they're like, how is it that you have a perfect head of hair? You know, I'm no younger than any of them, right? And rather than saying something like, it's genetics or whatever, I say, you really want to know? You really want to know? And they're like, yeah, I really want to know. I said, well, when I dry my hair, there's this prayer that I say over my hair, and I quote God's word. I say, this may sound corny, but the Bible says that God has every hair on your head numbered. It says that right in the Bible. And so when I start my prayer, I say, God, in your word, you say that you have every hair on my head numbered. And then I thank him for every single hair on my head. And then I pray that he leaves every single hair on my head in my head. And then I say, and I give you all the praise, honor, and glory for every single hair on my head. And so what am I doing right now, Sam? I'm giving him the glory for the hair on my head. That may seem really stupid and corny, but when my bald friends laugh at me, I'm like, you can laugh at me, but I have hair and you don't.
Right, right. That's right. Who's the funny one, perhaps, in this case? The Again, I love this, and it's coming back to just that's fearless and encourages faith that you have, which I think is beautiful. One thing that I saw, which was very interesting, was that South by Southwest Sunday service and high tech prayer breakfast. You merge faith and innovation. You did that multiple times, obviously, and you created basically events that connect leaders across tech, media, ministry. South by Southwest Sunday service being one. I I think it was interesting because it was Jonathan Shift, if I'm not mistaken, that talk about vision is the art of seeing what is invisible to others. Right, a little bit of what you were talking with your bald friend. I see perhaps that God wants me to keep my head of hair because He has all those hair numbered, and therefore I want to retain them. That is always been super interesting to me. But for you specifically to that, what inspired you to create spiritual sort of gatherings within high tech communities, and what impact have you witnessed from people that, let's be honest, are typically a bit more nerdy? I don't know them all, but I would say that the technological basically people and those in which have this high interest for technology and nerdy technology sometimes lag these conversations we're having right now. Call it intelligence, emotional intelligence, call it whatever you want. But what's impact have you witnessed within this specific set of group, perhaps?
Well, so just like I talked about how my calling found me, I didn't go seeking that job at Pricewater. They called me. I didn't even want the job, you know? So, you know, with these things that I've done, these are not things that I just got a wild hair and just decided, I'm gonna go do this, right? Because when I've tried to do stuff like that, it doesn't work. But in these two situations, these were both callings that were placed on my life. And so, that may be a hard concept for some people to grasp, but just like that phone call that I got from PricewaterhouseCoopers, right? Or Cooley, they called me, I didn't call them, right? Those were callings. And so when you have a calling from God, it's it's not necessarily an audible voice, but God works through people, he works through his word, he works through prayer, and he works through circumstances in the church. And so um, when a calling comes, you'll feel that tugging on your heart, like, oh, I need to do this. Like I heard about a guy who was doing this. Well, it wasn't just heard of. I went down to Atlanta for the prayer breakfast. I went down to Atlanta and I met with a guy that I worked with at PricewaterhouseCoopers. I didn't even know he was a believer. I had no idea, and I this guy named Ricky. I said, Ricky, what do we need? We had an office in Atlanta with this company. I said, what do we need to be doing in Atlanta? And he said something that surprised me. He goes, everybody who's somebody goes to the high tech prayer breakfast. I'm like, whoa, you can mix prayer with like, te- business and all. It seemed out there for me, but I felt this tug on my heart. How do you explain it? I mean, it was just like, I need to be doing this. And so I went back and I'm like, I need to do this. And I knew I needed to do this. And I tried to do it in the flesh. I tried to like email some people, set up a website, and I was doing this and nothing happened, nothing. And have you heard of a guy named Henry Blackaby? He wrote this. He
No.
wrote this book called Experiencing God, and there's a workbook, and I did it as part of a study group, and do the study if you want. I actually was blessed to have dinner with Henry Blackaby, which was pretty cool, but I read the book and I did the workbook, and the bottom line is in the of the study is God is at work all around you. Look and see where he is at work and join him rather than just trying to go get busy for him, but see where he is at work. And so the day we shut down that office in Atlanta was the day that I went to their high tech prayer breakfast. They had 2,000 people in that room. And it was the most amazing, like it was like number 2 guy from Cisco Systems gave this apologetic talk on how mathematically proved that the universe was created. It was the guy's name was Gary Dashent, if you ever want to look him up. Amazing message. And I'm like, there's no freaking way I'm doing this. I'm not doing this. This is too far out there, And so I went back and I'm like, no, too far out there. And there was a guy that another calling I had, I was doing this juvenile detention center ministry. So 20 years, I went 1 weekend a month into the jail. You probably won't find this out there doing your research, but because there's nothing glorious about it. I was ministering to 11 to 17-year-old juvenile delinquents. And there's no harder thing to do than try to share a message of the gospel with juvenile delinquents. But it's a great training ground. And so this guy that did this ministry with me, he got in my face. I never forget. He came behind my desk and he goes, Carl, God called you to do this, the prayer breakfast, and you need to do this. And I'm like, all right, you're right. His name's Randy Rowland, great friend of mine. I'm like, you're right, Randy. And so at that point, I reached out to the people in Atlanta because God was at work in Atlanta. So I reached out to the head of the ministry down there, and he sent me this book, and it was called The Prayer of Jabez. I don't know if you ever heard of it. I don't even remember reading about Jabez. There's like one sentence of him in the Bible, and he prayed that God would expand his territory. And he did. He expanded his territory. So they sent me this book. I read the book, and I sent an email to Bill. Bill Leonard was the guy's name. I said, Bill, I read the book, and if you're praying this prayer, I'm up here in DC at the time, and you're down there. I said, maybe I'm an answer to the prayer that you've been praying. And that's exactly what he wanted to hear. He told me what to do. He says, you assemble a core group of people, and I'm going to come visit you. And they had spent 10 years developing a brochure this big. It was a whole ginormous, I don't know if you've ever seen a phone book, but back in the day when they had phone books, they were big old things. It was the size of a phone book. And he gave it to us. He showed us some videos. He told us what to do. And he incubated our ministry. And you know what? We joined him where he was at work. And that first year, I think we had 300. And the next year we had 600. And then I think we maxed out whatever the maximum. It was over 800 people at the Ritz-Carlton ballroom. And it just grew and grew. And it's been going on since 2002. So what is that, like 23 years?
23 years now. Wow. That's amazing. And to me, I heard great things, obviously, from you, but my favorite piece of, call it a quote, call it whatever you want, that I retrieved from you was, Faith and innovation share the same DNA. Both believe in what doesn't exist yet. Tell us more about that.
Well, there's a whole chapter on faith is the substance of things not seen, like, hope for and not seen. Something, I'm butchering that scripture, but that's essentially the nature of it. So if you look at an entrepreneur, maybe an entrepreneur who's an atheist, right? That entrepreneur has faith in his or her idea, right? They have faith that this idea that they had is going to be something that everybody's going to want, right? You think about it. Amazon, Jeff Bezos, like, he had this idea that he was going to sell books online. Now he's selling us movies and everything, right? I mean, there was a guy who had faith in his idea, right? Every entrepreneur, Elon Musk, I mean, he just conceives of things in his mind. I don't know what kind of faith life the guy has. He has faith in his vision and his ability to execute. And the investors have faith in his ability to execute on his ideas, right? And so it's not that much different than spiritual faith, right? Because when you have that idea, what do you have to do? You have to go evangelize that idea, right? Entrepreneurs are evangelists. They're not evangelizing the gospel or the Bible. They're evangelizing their idea. And so they have to sell it to people that are going to work with them and join their team and work for free, right? They're going to work for equity. They're going to have to evangelize it to investors that are going to put money in that business. Then they're going to have to evangelize this thing to customers, right? I mean, just think it's evangelization, right? I would think that, the best entrepreneur would be an outstanding evangelist, right? And if if you've done it, I've actually seen entrepreneurs that used to be pastors that were really good evangelists. They go out and they have an idea to start a painting company, and then they, before you know it, they've got trucks and they've got customers, they've got employees. They're amazing stories, and so the skill set is very, very similar.
Oh man, this is incredible. Entrepreneurs or evangelists. That is a new thought for me. That is a new thought for me. Thank you for that one. I really appreciate it. And talking about, you as a mentor, perhaps, and as somebody that likes to help emerging leaders. Perhaps I am one of them, right? There is no coincidence in life. When you're thinking about this process of mentorship and multiplication, perhaps you really believe that leaders, through encouragement, through accountability, through example, perhaps, can do just that, can multiply themselves, multiply the organization and others. One of my favorite quote of all time is by John Quincy Adams, which is, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. And he said that with a much more eloquent tone than I just did. And it always marked me. That quote always marked me. If you had one piece of advice, or I suppose single most powerful practice you use to mentor emerging leaders, what would that be?
Well, I think every individual has greatness in them, and they don't even know what it is, right? I mean, sometimes, like the person that called me at PricewaterhouseCoopers, they saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself, right? If you can see that greatness in somebody and you can spot it and tell them, look, you've got potential here. I see it in you. And if you can cultivate that greatness and bring it out of that person, even if they're an employee, you set them free to become great in their role, and inspire them and encourage them about that greatness. Sometimes people are insecure. They don't know that it's in them, but you can spot it because you're perceptive and you see that person can be great at this or that. I've done that for many people over the years. And there's people that have done it for me too. I mean, I think about people that have led in the military. I mean, there are leaders that I would follow anywhere, and there is leaders that I wouldn't follow anywhere, right? I mean, it's there's a certain skill set to what you say to somebody and how you do it and how you treat people. And I remember in the military particularly, there's a whole bunch of regulations in the military, and you could do this like even working in a law firm. There's so many laws and rules to keep you from doing things, but it's the truly good military leaders and lawyers that don't use the regulations and the laws to tell people why they can't do what they want to do, but how to make those regulations and those laws work for them. I could take up hours giving you examples of things that people have done, but I'm just telling you, figuring out how to make the regulations work and there's risk in anything you do as well. And so I think the other part of doing this is calculated risk, right? So especially I've been in around the law firm world for 22 and a half years, right? And the really, really good lawyers know that there's risk in everything that you're going to do. And what they do is they advise you of the risk. They don't tell you not to do it, but they spot the risks and they try to mitigate the risks, but they encourage you to do what you're going to do in spite of the risk. Those are the great leaders.
All right. No, the biggest risk is to take none, is one of my mentor favorite
Exactly.
saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Because because you're right. Everything is hard. Everything is risk.
It's risky, Sam, getting out of bed in the morning. Like you get out of bed in the morning and you could trip and fall down, right?
That's right. That's right. I can take a walk down the streets and broke my ankle. Well, and it's possible. It
It's
definitely is
it's
possible.
it's like the sluggard or the lazy man described in the Bible who says, "I'm not going to go outside. I could get eaten by a lion." Yeah, I mean, maybe not where I live. There's not maybe a few mountain lions, but whatever. I mean, you could get robbed. Maybe not lions that we know
Yes,
today, but there's risks just getting in your car and driving down the street, right?
there
you
is.
can you can say, all right, I'm not going to take that risk. You're right. But the greatest rewards come from taking the greatest risks. I mean, you study this in finance,
100%.
right? In finance, there's a risk return ratio, right? So
Yes.
if you take all your money and you stick it under your mattress, you know, I guess it's pretty safe there if you have a well guarded mattress, right? But you're not gonna earn any interest. I mean, this was actually one of Jesus' teaching. There were three people that came to him, and he gave the story where they were given. I think it was minas back then, but it was think of it as dollars, right? We don't use minas today, but we have dollars, and so or pieces of silver that they had, and there was
Right.
there was the guy who had 10 and he got 10 more, right? And there was the guy that was given a few and he got a few more, but there was the guy who took what he had and he buried
Right.
it. And that guy who buried his gold, he says, I know you're a hard man, and so I wanted to save this and protect it for you. And you know what? He called him evil and he took it away from him and he gave it to the guy who got 10 more, right? And so I mean that's the spiritual piece of this. And I don't think it's necessarily about money. I think it's about the gifts that we've been given. We've been given gifts in life, right? You're taking a risk
Exactly.
doing this podcast. You're taking a risk having me on your podcast because I'm saying stuff that's a little out there, right? I am taking a
Sure.
risk putting my views out there. I may have a client who says, "Oh my gosh, he's praying for stuff to come in." Yeah, I am. And if you don't want God's blessing on your business, don't hire me, right? Don't, right? Because this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to pray for you, whether you like it or not, whether you believe in it or not. And so, like the guy who sticks his money under the mattress, he may keep his money, but I choose to put my money in stocks that have the ability to go up, right? And the
That's
riskier
right.
ones,
That's right.
the riskier ones, like I'm invested in a venture fund. That's risky. I may lose that money, but it also may make a lot of money, right? It can make millions of dollars, but it may be zero. That's a
It
high
may be
risk,
zero.
high return, right? And so that goes to taking risk.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And I really want. We always do this. Obviously, we always end with the future. Perhaps when you're thinking about the legacy and sort of the future of purpose-driven capital, which is a lot of what we talked about today, actually, where business, philanthropy, and faith sort of converge. Your vision for, I suppose, ethical investments and purpose-led capitalism is really fascinating to me. I really loved it, and reading about it was exceptionally interesting. And because you said capital should build communities, not just companies. That's what I believe as well. I believe that we shouldn't be enslaved in this mindset in which the end goal is to build an entity. No, the end goal is perhaps through the entity for the common people to have better lives, for humans to be empowered by them, not for humans to empower XYZ corporations. So what do you see as sort of the next evolution of faith in business, faith in finance, call it whatever you want, and how can leaders prepare for it and I suppose optimize themselves for such a world that we're foreseeing?
So is this the part where I'm supposed to give my my
No,
lasting speech?
that will be right after. This is the
Okay.
future question.
Okay. All right. Well, think about what you're building. You're building a legacy, right? And I'm gonna keep this theme for that last question too. But when you're building something, think about the legacy that you want to build, and think about every piece of this legacy, right? And so I could have been a successful guy building, billion, almost 2 billion in revenue at a firm, right? Big whoop, right? So I made a lot of money for people. I made these partners rich. Okay. I did a good job, but instead of just doing it the easy way and just doing, I went and I took a risk. I used that position as a platform to launch a ministry that was consistent with what I was doing. Did everybody agree with what I was doing? No. Uh-uh. No. But the vice chairman of that firm became our pro bono lawyer, and our employment partner became a table host. And so I was able to not just bring money into the firm, but I made an impact in the business community, right? By holding that breakfast for 20 some odd years. Think about all the lives that were changed. I can't tell you how many people came to me and said, I was having problems in my marriage. And because of the message I heard at the breakfast, I went to an anger management class at a church and I got my anger under control. And now my marriage is doing great. Like those kind of stories, that's what really matters, right? I mean, think about it, right? Yeah, people made millions of dollars. Great, but people also had their lives changed, their families kept intact as a result, right? Not to mention eternity, right? I mean, think about the impact for eternity, right? You get 800 people a year for 20 plus years coming in to hear a message from business people. I had the CEO of Intel speak at a breakfast. I've had amazing business leaders speak, right? He spoke at the South by Southwest Sunday service, right? You're hearing credible people talk about how they've used this in their business, right? And so I think it's just not the top line or the bottom line. It's the impact in the community that you're operating in.
True leadership is measured by the leaders you create, not the followers you collect. Mr. Carl Grant III, what a pleasure it was to have you on the show. Thank you so much for being so bold, being so you, perhaps. And it was really an exceptionally interesting conversation, weaving in so much important pillars of life and a sort of a convergence of what I can look like when they're all synergetically perhaps put together. And I would love if you can leave our audience with some last words of wisdom, please.
All right, well, so the last bit of wisdom is think about what's truly important in your life, right? Besides being successful in business or whatever ministry, whatever it is you're doing in life, think about the true legacy that you leave. It's really in a family, right? And so I literally yesterday just had a conversation with a dear friend of mine from Saudi Arabia who got married and had a child with her husband, and the husband was, he's made a lot of money in the business he's in. I'm not giving any names, so I'm not giving anything private. But when they had their baby, he backed away, and she said he's not ready. He's not ready to be a dad. The guy's 35 years old. Like, when are you going to be ready? It's like, you know, if you're not ready by 35, you're never going to be ready, right? And so there's a risk, just like there's a risk in investing or in business. There's a risk in getting married, and there's a risk in having children, right? What if my kid grows up to be a knucklehead? What if he grows up to be a drug addict or a thief or whatever, right? You know, you can shape that to a point, but you can't micromanage that person throughout the rest of your life. I got married 31 years ago, and I've had 5 children. My wife's been pregnant 8 times. She's had 5 children. And there's a risk associated with that. But what legacy is more important in one's life than leaving a legacy? Like none of those people I made rich at the firms that I worked for are going to give a hoot about me, 10 years from now. I don't care. They care about what they made back when I was there. They don't care. They don't care anymore. But my children care about me. My wife cares about me, and I'm expecting my first grandchild, and that person's going to care about me too. And so think about what's really important in life and leave a true lasting legacy. Don't just enrich yourself and not enrich. I am maybe less financially risked because I've had as many children as I've had. And I've made sure that they could go to the colleges that they want to go to and have the things that, go on nice trips and experience the world. Yeah. But my life is more full as a result. And so that's the lasting thought, is think about what's really important in life.
Thank you for spending your time with us today on the Meaningful Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or share it with someone who could benefit from it. And always remember, your story matters. Make it meaningful. We hope to see you next time.